Nobody was ready for this. Bill Maher didn't joke. He didn't hesitate. On live TV, he directly challenged Michelle Obama, and the studio lost control. Half the crowd erupted in applause. The other half started booing. Panelists froze. Cameras scrambled. This wasn't planned. And once he said it, there was no taking it back. What happened next split the room and ignited a nationwide debate. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Now let's dive into what really happened. The room went silent, the kind of silence that makes your heart stop for a second, and then everything exploded. No one in the studio was prepared for what was about to happen. What started as a calm, controlled discussion suddenly transformed into one of the most intense and unforgettable moments late-night television had seen in a long time. You could hear gasps ripple through the audience. Faces froze mid-reaction. Some people leaned forward in disbelief, while others sat back, stunned. Within seconds, phones were out. Social media feeds began to flood. Clips were being shared before the segment had even finished. At the center of it all stood Bill Maher. Known for his sharp wit, fearless commentary, and complete lack of filter, Maher has never been one to play it safe. But this time felt different. This wasn't just another joke or political jab. This was direct. This was serious. And it was aimed at one of the most respected public figures in modern American history, former First Lady Michelle Obama. As the conversation shifted toward Michelle Obama's recent comments about American society, struggle, and political culture, the tone of the room subtly changed. Until that moment, her remarks had been widely praised. Many saw them as thoughtful, emotional, and deeply personal reflections on life in America. To her supporters, she was speaking truth. She was voicing pain that many people felt but couldn't express. But Bill Maher didn't nod along. Instead, he paused. He leaned forward in his chair. And that's when the tension became almost unbearable. You could feel it, that split second before something controversial is said. The audience sensed it. The panelists sensed it. Even the cameras seemed to linger just a bit longer. Then Maher spoke, and the mood instantly shifted. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't laugh it off. He didn't soften his words. He directly challenged the claims, questioning not just a message, but the broader narrative behind it. And that was the moment everything changed. This was no longer a polite discussion. This wasn't a respectful difference of opinion. This was a full-blown confrontation, one that divided the room in real time. Some audience members looked shocked, their mouths slightly open. Others nodded quietly, as if he had finally said something they'd been thinking all along. A few panelists exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure whether to interrupt or let it play out. Michelle Obama's comments had touched on personal struggle, systemic challenges, and the emotional weight of public life. For many viewers, those words carried authority and authenticity. Challenging them felt almost forbidden. But Bill Maher went there anyway. As he continued, the tension kept rising. Each sentence felt heavier than the last. The air in the studio felt thick, charged with anticipation and discomfort. You could almost hear the unspoken question hanging in the room. Did he really just say that? This wasn't about humor anymore. This wasn't about ratings. This was about challenging a powerful narrative, live, unscripted, and without apology. By the time Maher finished his opening remarks, the studio was no longer neutral ground. Lines had been drawn. Reactions were locked in. And one thing was absolutely clear. This moment was going to be talked about long after the cameras stopped rolling. And this confrontation was only just beginning. Bill Maher was careful about one thing. He made it clear he was not attacking Michelle Obama as a person. In fact, he openly acknowledged her intelligence, her influence, and the respect she commands around the world. But then he drew a clear line. What he was challenging, Maher said, was the message behind her claims. According to Maher, words matter, especially when they come from someone with a global platform. He pushed back against the idea that America should be framed primarily as a place of oppression, despair, and hopelessness. While he admitted that the country has serious flaws, he argued that constantly emphasizing what's broken can have dangerous consequences. He explained that when people hear over and over again that the system is rigged and the future is bleak, it doesn't inspire change, It drains motivation. It tells struggling people that their efforts don't matter and that success is nearly impossible, no matter how hard they try. And that's when Maher asked a question that changed everything. If America is so irredeemably flawed, he said, pausing for effect, why do millions of people still risk everything to come here? The moment he said it, the studio reacted. You could hear quiet murmurs ripple through the audience. Some heads nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. It was a rhetorical question. It was a challenge, and everyone felt it. Maher went on to argue that immigrants don't flee to America because it's perfect. They come because it offers possibility, opportunity, a chance to build something better than what they left behind. In his view, that reality directly contradicts the idea that the country is fundamentally hopeless. At the same time, Maher acknowledged Michelle Obama's personal experiences and struggles. He admitted that her perspective is shaped by what she's lived through, and that those experiences deserve to be heard. But he added, having lived experience does not make any viewpoint beyond question. He emphasized that Michelle Obama's influence is enormous. Millions listen to her. Millions believe her. And with that level of reach, Maher argued, comes a responsibility to present a balanced narrative. According to him, focusing primarily on what's wrong risks overshadowing progress that has already been made, progress that came from hard work, reform, and personal accountability. He warned that ignoring those improvements can create a sense of permanent victimhood, where people feel trapped by circumstances rather than empowered to overcome them. As Maher spoke, the reactions in the studio grew stronger. A portion of the audience broke into loud applause, clearly agreeing with his point. Their clapping wasn't polite. It was enthusiastic, almost relieved, as if someone had finally said what they'd been thinking. But not everyone agreed. Other audience members sat with their arms crossed, faces tense, clearly uncomfortable. Some shook their heads. A few panelists looked ready to jump in, unsure whether to challenge Maher or let him continue. The divide in the room was unmistakable. This wasn't just a debate about one person's comments anymore. It had become a larger conversation about how America is talked about, who gets to shape that narrative, and whether optimism and criticism can exist at the same time. By the end of Maher's argument, one thing was clear. The studio was no longer unified. It was officially split, not just in opinion, but in worldview, and that divide was about to get even deeper. What happened next turned a simple debate into a defining moment. As Bill Maher continued speaking, the studio stopped feeling like a television set and started feeling like a pressure cooker. Reactions poured in from every corner of the room, not quietly, not politely, but all at once. One panelist leaned forward, clearly tried to jump in and redirect the conversation. Another shook their head in disbelief, leaning back in their chair as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. A third sat silently, nodding along, choosing not to speak but making their agreement unmistakably clear. The camera didn't know where to look. Faces told the story better than words ever could. Some audience members were wide-eyed, stunned by Maher's willingness to go there. Others whispered to the people sitting next to them. You could see hands covering mouths, eyebrows raised, jaws clenched. This wasn't passive viewing. Everyone in that room was emotionally invested. And then came the loudest moment of the night. Without warning, one section of the audience erupted into applause, loud, sustained, and unapologetic. It wasn't polite clapping. It was a kind of applause that says, yes, finally. But before the clapping could settle, another section fired back with boos just as loud. The clash of reactions collided in real time. Cheers, boos, gasps, shouting. The noise bounced off the studio walls, creating chaos that even seasoned producers weren't ready for. The energy was raw, unpredictable, and completely unscripted. Bill Maher paused. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He simply looked around the room. That pause said everything. He let the noise breathe. He let the audience reveal itself. And then, when the room was still buzzing, he spoke again, calmly, firmly, and without backing down. What he said next poured fuel on an already raging fire. Maher reminded everyone that disagreement is not the same as disrespect. He said that challenging ideas, even popular ones, is essential to honest conversation. And then he delivered a line that would echo long after the show ended. Questioning powerful voices should never be off-limits, no matter how admired or beloved they are. That single statement detonated the room all over again. Another wave of applause surged through the studio. More boos followed immediately. Some people stood. Others folded their arms tighter. The divide was no longer subtle. This moment wasn't about left versus right. It wasn't about party politics. It wasn't even really about Michelle Obama anymore. It was about who gets challenged and who doesn't. It was about whether certain voices are protected from scrutiny simply because of who they are. It was about whether open debate still exists when emotions run high and loyalties are strong. The panelists looked uneasy. A few tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground, but it was too late. The genie was out of the bottle. The audience had already chosen sides. The studio felt electric, charged with tension, conviction, and confrontation. Every word felt heavier. Every reaction felt amplified. You could tell this wasn't just another TV moment that would fade by morning. This was the kind of moment people replay, repost, and argue about for weeks. Chaotic, uncomfortable, unforgettable. As the noise slowly died down, one thing became painfully clear. This conversation had crossed a line, not into disrespect, but into something far more dangerous and powerful. Honest disagreement. And once that door opens, there's no closing it again. This confrontation hit a nerve not because of who was involved, but because of what it revealed. At its core, this moment exposed a much bigger issue that has been quietly growing for years: the culture of criticism versus a culture of silence. Who is allowed to be questioned, and who is treated as untouchable? Michelle Obama represents far more than a former First Lady to millions of people. She symbolizes hope, resilience, dignity, and perseverance. Her story resonates deeply, especially with those who have felt unheard or marginalized. To her supporters, questioning her words didn't feel like debate. It felt personal. It felt disrespectful. For some viewers, watching Bill Maher challenge her perspective crossed a line. But for others, it felt long overdue. Maher tapped into a growing frustration among audiences who believe that certain narratives are treated as unquestionable truths. In their view, disagreement has slowly become confused with disloyalty, and skepticism has been labeled as hostility. And that's where this moment became explosive. Maher wasn't arguing that Michelle Obama was wrong or dishonest. He wasn't dismissing her experiences. What he was pushing back against was the idea that any perspective should be beyond discussion, simply because of who is delivering it. That distinction mattered. But not everyone heard it the same way. Supporters of Maher praised him almost immediately. They flooded social media with clips, comments, and reactions, saying he voiced thoughts many people are afraid to express publicly. To them, this wasn't about attacking a person. It was about defending open conversation. On the other side, critics reacted just as strongly. They accused Maher of being dismissive, insensitive, and out of touch. Some felt he minimized real struggles by focusing on optimism and progress. Others argued that his tone ignored emotional realities in favor of intellectual debate. Both sides felt deeply justified. And that tension is exactly why this moment spread like wildfire. In today's media landscape, disagreement is often framed as aggression. Nuance gets lost. Conversations turn into sides. And once labels are applied, listening stops. This debate forced people to confront an uncomfortable truth. Real conversations are rarely neat or calm. They are emotional. They are messy. They are loud. And they often make people uncomfortable. But discomfort doesn't mean something is wrong. In fact, discomfort is often a sign that something important is being discussed. What made this moment so powerful was that it reflected a divide many people already feel in their daily lives, at work, online, and even among friends and family. The fear of speaking openly, the hesitation to question popular opinions, the pressure to agree publicly, even when privately unsure. Whether viewers agreed with Bill Maher or not, one thing was undeniable. He exposed a cultural divide that had been quietly widening beneath the surface. A divide between protecting feelings and challenging ideas, between honoring lived experience and allowing debate, between silence and scrutiny. This wasn't just a viral TV clip. It was a mirror And not everyone liked what they saw. And that's exactly why people couldn't stop watching, sharing, and arguing about it. This wasn't just another TV argument that people forget by the next morning. It was a moment that lingered because it revealed how deeply divided the conversations become and how powerful words can be when they come from influential voices. Public figures don't just share opinions. They shape narratives. And narratives shape how millions of people see the world, see their country, and even see themselves. That's what made this exchange so important. Michelle Obama's words resonate deeply with people who feel unheard, overlooked, or emotionally exhausted by the state of society. For many, she gives voice to struggles they've carried quietly for years. Her perspective offers validation, comfort, and a sense of being seen. On the other side, Bill Maher's response struck a chord with those who feel silenced by one-sided conversations. People who believe that optimism, progress, and personal responsibility deserve space in the discussion too. For them, Maher wasn't dismissing pain. He was demanding balance. And that's the key point. Neither side walked away unchanged. Supporters of Michelle Obama were forced to confront the idea that admiration doesn't automatically mean agreement. Supporters of Bill Maher had to consider whether blunt honesty sometimes risks overlooking emotional realities. The studio eruption symbolized something much larger than a single disagreement. It reflected a society struggling to balance empathy with honesty and respect with debate. We live in a time where many people feel pressure to choose sides instead of having conversations, where silence is often rewarded more than curiosity, where asking the wrong question can feel riskier than staying quiet. This moment challenged that pattern. It reminded viewers that disagreement doesn't have to mean hatred, that questioning an idea isn't the same as attacking a person, and that growth often comes from uncomfortable conversations, not safe ones. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about challenging comfort zones. It was about asking hard questions in an era where safe answers are often preferred because they don't upset anyone, even if they don't move the conversation forward. By the time the show ended, the reactions were still pouring in. Clips were being shared. Comment sections were exploding. Friends were arguing. Families were debating. That's how you know a moment mattered. Not because everyone agreed, but because everyone felt something. And by the end of the night, one thing was undeniable. This conversation wasn't over. It had only just begun. The real discussion was no longer confined to a studio audience or a television panel. It had moved into living rooms, online spaces, and everyday conversations, exactly where it belonged. Because moments like this don't give us answers. They give us questions. And sometimes the questions are far more powerful than the answers ever could be.